Hey followers, hope things are going well. Today I'm interviewing Dr. David Black, the former toxicologist for NASCAR. Let's see if he answers the phone.
Hello, this is Dave Black.
Hey Dr. Black, this is Doug Kenney. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. It means an awful lot to be chatting with you because I always like chatting with people from motor racing.
Oh, well, it's a very uh, close family, close-knit family in motorsports, and it's also a very interesting part of the sports world.
Yeah, for sure. So you were the toxicologist for the Drug Administration of the sport?
Yes, I was the program advisor for NASCAR and IndyCar, and I worked with NASCAR going. In fact, I'm still doing a little something here and there with them, but I began working with them. I believe it was 1988. Could have
Ah,
been 89, and I was the program administrator until I left my position at Aegis Sciences Corporation. I left there in 2016, so that was a good number of years I worked with NASCAR.
that's pretty cool, man. So I
Yeah,
have a list of questions about your involvement in the sport and about your medical career, and hopefully you have the answer for them. And just let me know if some of them are confidential, all right?
sure. As a forensic scientist, I'm always sensitive to the confidential nature of what my profession is supposed to do.
Yeah, and I commend you for that. So, where are you originally from?
Michigan. I was born in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and grew up outside of Detroit, a little town called Wayne.
Ah, pretty cool. That's the home state of Brad Keselowski, if I remember right.
Oh gosh, well, I'm sure there's parts of this you'll know better than me, but it. When I grew up, we all grew up working on cars. I rebuilt my first engine when I was, about 13 or 14 years of age, and grew up in a gas station. And where I lived, you either made cars, serviced cars, repaired cars, but everything revolved around cars.
Yeah. I believe that was the location of the Ford company as well, I believe.
Oh, sure, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler. In fact, all the headquarters were there in Detroit.
Really interesting. So, what made you decide to become a toxicologist?
Well, I have to confess that there's a fair amount of serendipity in my life, and I I graduated from high school, joined the Marine Corps, served in Vietnam, had my GI Bill to go through college, and when I was uh, as I was graduating from undergraduate, I had thought I would like to go to medical school and become an ophthalmologist. But I was applying to medical school at a time when there were about 100 applicants for every seat in medical school, and I couldn't get in. And I discovered by accident this forensic toxicology program at the University of Maryland School of Medicine.
Hmm.
And so I applied and was accepted, and my training was at the medical examiner's office in Baltimore doing postmortem death investigation work.
Ah, that sounds like a good field.
So I really thought my career being a forensic scientist, and my doctorate degree is in the field of legal medicine, and I really thought I would spend my career dealing with the deceased, and had no idea I would end up spending my career mostly working on the living, because my training was really in death investigation. But with the epidemic of drug use in our society, I have ended up working in many programs that are dealing with trying to monitor and ensure that there's no abuse of medications or drugs. And I was recruited to Vanderbilt University in 1986 to set up an anti-doping program testing athletes for the use of performance-enhancing drugs, and that's what led me ultimately to the NASCAR program.
Oh, pretty interesting. Yeah, drug abuse is it's a serious thing. No other way to put it.
No, it's harmful across our society, and of course, it isn't particular about anybody's ideology or their racial background or their ethnic background. It touches all parts of our society negatively.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's just, yeah, I saw what it did to Salt Walther. Yeah.
Yep, in my career, I've not only dealt with issues in sport, but also workplace drug testing, post-mortem death investigation work still, but also in education and other applied areas in clinical toxicology, dealing with overdose work. And the impact on our society is tremendous.
Yeah, I agree with you on that 100%. So, where did you get your PhD at?
It was the University of Maryland School of Medicine in downtown Baltimore, Maryland. And but it was the graduate program underneath the School of Medicine. So although I took classes in the law school and in the medical school, my primary classes and my study and then my research were all under the graduate school.
Really interesting. How long did it take you to get your doctorate?
Let's see. I began in 74, got my degree in 83 for the PhD. My undergraduate degree was awarded in 1974, so it took 9 years to earn my doctorate degree.
Ah, that must have been a lot of work.
Well, I was working full time to support a family, and I had to then also do full time research work to satisfy my doctoral requirements, and had a lot of coursework to take as well. But yeah, I was very accustomed to working in 80, 90-hour weeks to work my way through school.
That's
I was born very poor. My GI Bill helped me get through school, but it didn't cover all the tuition costs, books costs, living costs. And then I met and married my wife while I was earning my PhD. And then when I married her, she had 3 children that I adopted. And so I ended up suddenly with this family as well as, so it was very challenging, but very interesting.
That's good to hear. And do you have any siblings at all?
I have 4 siblings. I have 2 who have died of drug overdoses. And then I have my youngest sibling just passed away. He really died from a lifetime of tobacco use. He was 11 years younger than me, and he passed away from his lifetime of tobacco use. He died with a great deal of cancer throughout his body.
My sincere condolences on that.
Well, thank you. He just passed recently, and just tough to see somebody so much younger, passing before yourself.
It's kind of ironic that you're the guy making better choices and your siblings, Yeah.
Well, my other surviving sibling is still a drug abuser, and so out of all my siblings, 3 were sincere drug abusers, and 2 died of drug overdoses, and then my youngest brother is a tobacco user. But I'm the only one who did not take that route. I have never smoked. I do not drink to any excess, and I try not to take drugs at all unless I absolutely have to have them.
Yeah, that's good on you, man. What is it like being married to a person in Congress?
Well, Diane's now retired, but I will say her career has been an outstanding career. Budget in Congress, and she's been very successful in her politics, both at the state level when she was in the House and the Senate, but then also at the federal level. And it's been a great journey. She and I have enjoyed a wonderful life experience together, and certainly in her political position, we had the chance to, meet a number of presidents. She actually worked with President Trump very closely, but we met President Obama, President Clinton. I never met President Reagan, although I met Nancy Reagan. But it's been great to have a chance to meet people like Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel and, travel the world with congressional trips and get a chance to really, although I've seen the other part of the world, especially third world, in mission trips, it's been interesting to go to other parts of the world and interact with those societies and get another view of the world.
That's really cool, man. And now that you brought that up, I must ask, is Trump a nice guy?
Personally, well, it is like Bill Clinton, like President Obama. Put politics aside, and these are all very good, interesting people. And Joe Biden, people unfortunately get too vitriolic these days. Joe Biden is really a very fine man. I may not agree with all of his political opinions, but that doesn't mean he isn't a good person and a nice person. And I just, I'm one of those who's very wary of all the negativity that we see in our society today surrounding our political process.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah,
people are all. Oh, go ahead.
Just real quickly, so you know, people who work directly for President Trump, and I'm not talking about in the White House or anything, I'm talking about in his business and all. They love him. They want to be there forever, and he's been very good to promoting women and hiring minorities, and so there's a lot of aspects about President Trump that go unidentified because it's just not going to be promoted and pushed. But I can tell you that I've met a lot of folks who are folks who say work in housekeeping or in the kitchen of the hotels, or people who work in his properties and all, that just love working for the Trump organization. They're treated very well.
That's really cool to hear. Yeah, I kind of have a neutral opinion on our politicians, and I always have respect for whoever's in the office, regardless if I agree with their policies.
Well, we're supposed to do that. I mean, once elected, he's president as all of our presidents. I may not have agreed with President Obama all the time. Didn't agree with President Clinton all the time. I don't agree with President Trump all the time. So,
yeah.
Yeah. I don't think the standard ought to be if I'm happy all the time. That shouldn't be the standard.
Yeah, for sure. When did you found Aegis Sciences Corporation?
That was founded, it was a program at Vanderbilt University, but I took it off campus in 1990 after Vanderbilt decided not to continue funding the program. So I joined Vanderbilt in July 1 of 1986, and then exactly 4 years later, on July 1 of 1990, we took and opened up the doors for Aegis Sciences off campus as a private corporation.
So it's Aegis, or is it Aegis?
Folks pronounce it either way. Aegis, A-E, but the A is really silent. It's Aegis is the way most dictionaries show it being pronounced. And it's the name of the shield used by Zeus, and it means to protect or defend. It comes out of the Greek heritage. And we would always present our services as protecting and defending the health of the individuals we test, as well as the integrity of the programs that we provide our services to.
Alrighty. What is the process of testing like at Aegis Sciences?
Well, what we were at Aegis were, as the company developed, we took a focus of, in fact, we actually trademarked what was called zero tolerance drug testing. And we would test at greater sensitivity, more comprehensively, and we developed testing strategies that protected against the adulteration processes that people use to try to defeat a drug test. So over time, I recruited in, I started with people. By the time I left the company in 2014, we had 1,000 employees. And along the way, I had recruited in 25 PhDs. And what we were doing, we were focusing on unusual and unique markers in the body that indicate drug use that other laboratories were not monitoring, so that we could protect, when we were services, we could protect against what is known as a false negative test. And so we would publish or present at professional meetings about 25 to 30 research papers every year. We had a very academic kind of approach to our operations and our mission. And what that did is it allowed us to really develop a lot of methods that were much more comprehensive in identifying drug users, which really all of that approach came out of the sports testing, because in sports, when they say they don't want you to use drugs, they really mean it. And then what we did is we applied what we learned there into our post-mortem work, into our workplace drug testing work, into our other application areas. And so that gave us a great benefit in the marketplace, because we had a much more sensitive and more comprehensive approach to identifying substance abuse.
All righty. So you were trying to test people while making sure that they didn't cheat, right?
For the sports, yes, it was a matter of cheating. In many of the other application areas, it was a matter of safety or personal harm. But in the sports world, it's all about trying to keep an even playing field and try to not allow the drugs to become a significant issue in the outcome of a sporting event.
Makes a lot of sense. What made NASCAR decide to select you guys over other drug testing companies like LabCorp?
Well, I think this would be 1987. I was recruited to head the National Football League steroid testing program. And then in 1988, NASCAR had a specific problem with a driver with they had a problem with a drug test, and they were in a embarrassing situation where they had been misled by their then advisor. And unbeknownst to me, the NFL and NASCAR and a lot of these major sports programs have a lot of crossover in personnel and relationships. And I guess NASCAR asked the NFL who they were using for their program, and they referred NASCAR to me. And so I helped NASCAR get out of a difficult situation with one of their drivers. And as a consequence, I ended up working with them and developing a program at NASCAR that was better, better in conformity with a true forensic program. They just had not had the right input prior to my becoming involved.
Okay. I think the driver you're referring to was Tim Richmond, if I remember right.
You are absolutely correct. And they had a situation of a test result that was not conducted properly, and I managed to assist them in dealing with that issue and navigating out of that particular problem. And the result of that was a very positive, great long-term relationship.
That's good to hear. And is that why IndyCar selected you as well? The same thing?
Yeah, well, actually, it was NASCAR that ultimately recommended to IndyCar that I be their program administrator at IndyCar. So it's kind of interesting that in the whole drug testing world, there aren't a lot of people like myself available anyway. It's not like there's a large pool of people. But at the time in which this was going on, I may have been about the only board-certified forensic toxicologist actually involved in this application area, because the scientists that were involved in anti-doping were primarily coming out of Europe, with Dr. Manfred Donecke out of Cologne, Germany, and then out of the International Olympic Committee Laboratory Network. And this is just where the testing was really beginning to grow here in the United States in professional sport. And so I was kind of a unique, in the business world, when we're trying to find somebody that's got a strange set of circumstances, we call them a purple squirrel. Well, I was kind of that guy. There weren't that many people out there that were board certified in both clinical and forensic toxicology that could do this kind of work.
All righty. That makes a lot of sense, and that's really good info you've provided. Yeah. So what exactly was NASCAR's drug policy, or is that confidential?
Well, I think I can speak to it generically. We began with a reasonable suspicion program and a post-accident program, but it was a number of years before we developed a random program, which once you begin to do random testing, that's going to be a much bigger budget item, much more intrusive into the private lives of individuals. You have to develop the program carefully to ensure that you're not going to capture medications or drugs that they may be using for their health reasons and falsely accuse them of being a drug abuser. So there are a lot of steps you need to take in developing a program that does not have some direct causative basis for the test. In random testing, that's what it is. It's just purely random without any established suspicion of use or abuse. Whereas in reasonable suspicion or post-accident, you've got a lot of justification to test.
Yeah.
So moving to the random program was a big change in the program when that occurred. And it took a number of years for that to develop. But so for a number of years, it was really a reasonable suspicion and post-accident program.
All righty. Yeah, I remember reading an article years ago when Mayfield was suspended, and I learned a little bit about how random drug tests were administered a little bit.
Yeah, Jeremy was, certainly then he was our most significant positive, and of course he made it more sensational by his reaction to it rather than cooperating with treatment. And that was one of the, and I still think NASCAR has one of the very best programs in all of sports, because in NASCAR, you're suspended indefinitely if you have a positive test. And then under the program, you would have to go through what was called the road to recovery to be able to be considered for reinstatement. So I would take somebody and direct somebody through the treatment program. We would do, of course, a lot of testing on that individual to monitor them. And then eventually, if they were cooperative, we would come to a place where I would then recommend that NASCAR consider. I did not reinstate. I would just be in a position to reach a point eventually, hopefully, that I could recommend someone to be considered for reinstatement.
Yeah. And the way I look at Jeremy Mayfield, the way I look at it is whether you agree with it or not, you run under NASCAR's rules. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure. No. In all programs, there's a education process. There's a signature somewhere that someone has reviewed the policy. They agree with the policy. They will comply with the policy. Now, of course, it's not surprising that on occasion you'll find somebody who signs that document and agrees with all of that, but they're still a drug user, and when they test positive, they don't like the fact that they signed all that.
Yeah. But yeah, the way I look at it, if I were Jeremy, I would have just gone through the road to recovery and then make the comeback of the century, because Allmendinger proved it wasn't impossible. You know what I mean?
Oh, no, so many cases were not public that we dealt with, that individuals would go through the road to recovery, they would be reinstated, and but I think the difficulty with Jeremy, methamphetamine is a terrible drug. It's a terribly addictive drug, and I think the issue with Jeremy was perhaps that going through the road to recovery as a rehabilitation process was going to be extremely difficult and perhaps impossible for him. But he decided to take a path that was unfortunately ultimately very personally destructive for himself and his family. Yeah,
I'm with you on that. And this is my next one. And again, if it's confidential, then you can skip it. But this is what it is. When Jeremy Mayfield sued you guys after failing the test, NASCAR said in your defense that Aegis was superior to LabCorp. How exactly is it so?
Well, I never wished to really speak badly of my colleagues that work in other laboratory systems, but this would require actually a whiteboard and a lot of conversation. But fundamentally, as I mentioned previously, what Aegis had done, we had spent a lot of time researching and developing methods where we tested more sensitively for more metabolites or byproducts in the body as indicators of use. And we also had developed strategies to protect against sample manipulation or adulteration. Well, large reference laboratories like a LabCorp or a Quest, and this is just a reality, they're processing many more samples per day than, say, a laboratory like Aegis, and their thresholds for testing were typically higher, and they tested for fewer markers of use, and they were also subject to being manipulated by the donor who was providing the sample, or the sample was subject to being manipulated. So in programs like that, there are many more false negative answers that arise, so you can have drug users pass that kind of testing. And one of the reasons why sports organizations would work with Aegis is because we had, when I was at Vanderbilt, as well as after we became private, we invested a lot of time and energy into testing more sensitively, more comprehensively, and with systems that were not subject to manipulation. I will tell you, too, that we would have people who would look at what we did at Aegis and say, well, that doesn't conform with the federal drug testing program, and therefore what you're doing is, quote, illegal. Well, the federal drug testing program did not apply to private sector testing. And everything we always did was still compliant with good laboratory practices. We were certified by every possible certifying agency. And so although we tested more sensitively and more comprehensively, everything we did was compliant with good laboratory practices and good forensic practices.
All righty. That makes a lot of sense. So LabCorp just doesn't have the research to catch any attempts at cheating. Is that right?
Well, yeah, and what they've really done is they've set up a program that is compliant with federal testing, but the thresholds and the drugs included in federal testing, it's very few drugs, very few markers, and very high thresholds. So if you're running your program consistent with federal DOT, Department of Transportation guidelines, it's not necessarily a good application for the sports world. And Jeremy actually did collect samples on himself, submit them to LabCorp to show that he was not using drug. But the reason why he would test negative is because the testing being done at LabCorp was not really developed to try to be applied to sports testing where they want better testing.
Oh, I see. That makes a whole lot of sense. Thanks for that info.
Yeah, Jeremy did that several times, and he would try to say that LabCorp is right and Dr. Black is wrong. I will tell you, over my career, we've had it happen many, many, many times where we'll test somebody positive, they'll collect a sample or arrange for a sample collection where they determine the date and time where that sample is collected so they can control the whole event, submit it to a laboratory, get a negative result back, and then try to think, well, that shows I wasn't really using drug. But a second sample collected at a different date and time is irrelevant to a sample collected under controlled conditions,
yes,
under the direction of the program.
Yes, that makes sense. And again, it goes back to the rules of NASCAR. You're bound to them when you're in the sport. You know what I mean?
And but what I just said too would be true for workplace drug testing. At the workplace, they'll tell an employee, you need to go this date and time and give a sample.
Yeah.
Well, it would be irrelevant if a day later or 2 days later that you go collect another sample and say, oh, I may have tested positive on that sample, but that's a mistake. I tested here 2 days later and I was negative. Well, the different collection events, 2 different times, and you control the one and we control the other. It's irrelevant what you did. But that would be true in any testing application setting. You don't let the donor select the date and time. You select the date and time so they don't know when they're going to be tested.
That way they have no time to cheat.
Yes, they don't have time to prepare for it, to superhydrate themselves or go out and buy some product they're going to add to the urine sample to try to defeat the drug test.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, I have a 2-hour lecture I give on just how do you defeat a drug test. So there's a lot of strategies out there that people use, and people in sports have always been more sophisticated about that than the people in the workplace or elsewhere. So in the sports world, it's a real challenge to make sure you control that program and manage that program in a way that the donor or the athlete who's going to be providing that sample does not get a chance to manipulate the process.
Alrighty. That makes a lot of sense. And this is my next one. When it came to road course races like Montreal, Sonoma, and Watkins Glen, did any of the non-regular road course ringers have to get tested too?
Oh, for NASCAR?
Yeah, for NASCAR.
Oh yeah. We tested beyond the drivers, and our program applied to pit crew, to administrators within the NASCAR organization. The program was beyond the drivers. I mean, of course, the drivers, in terms of safety, were a great concern, but the pit crew as well. I mean, the pit crew has big impact on the safety and reliability of the vehicle, but also we had other folks beyond that we were concerned about as well. Anybody who was in a position that could impact the safety of the audience coming to watch the races or involved in that process. It's a very comprehensive program.
Alrighty. What exactly is the NASCAR Road to Recovery process like?
Well, the road to recovery again begins with a positive test. When there was a positive test, the individual being positive has the opportunity to request they can challenge that test result. There's an A sample and a B sample, or just a single sample. It could be either sample or two sample, but they would have a right to request a retest of the sample. They could have a witness, a professional scientist, come in and witness that retest. And if they didn't request that, then we would just move forward with the first positive result. But upon retest request, we would wait until the retest was completed. And if it reconfirmed, then we would move forward with the suspension. And one of the things we always did in the NASCAR program is, you may be familiar that we've had a lot of supplement products in the marketplace that can contribute drugs into your body system at very, very low concentrations.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you took it for some sort of enhancement. So we were always very conscious in the program of looking at the supplements used by anyone who tested positive, making sure that they did not contribute to the possibility of a positive test. But once we had concluded that there was a positive test, the individual was suspended. It's a lifetime indefinite suspension unless the individual cooperates and goes through the road to recovery. The road to recovery would involve finding a treatment center for them that I would approve as a treatment cner. There are all sorts of types of treatment centers in the world, and you want to make sure that whatever treatment center is going to be dealing with this individual is, in fact, a legitimate, certified, licensed treatment center. And so they would go through treatment. From Aegis, we would unannounced and repetitively schedule sample collections on the individuals so we could monitor that they were compliant with no longer using any drug, as well as the drug they tested positive for. And it would depend upon the drug. It would depend upon the level of cooperation of the individual. But that process would typically take months. It could take 3 months. It could take 6 months for someone to reach a point in the process where I would be able to consider, or where I would then recommend them to be considered for reinstatement. But it was a tough program to get through. If somebody was uncooperative, we would extend the period of counseling as well as testing. And we would, of course, receive all medical assessments and counseling notes and get an opinion from the counselors in terms of cooperation of the individual and had they complied with the counseling program. But our hope always was we would have the individual discontinue their bad drug behavior, and that we would reach a place where we could reinstate the individual. We were not in the business of trying to harm individuals, their livelihood or their reputation. What we wanted to do was to recover that individual, rehabilitate that individual, and get them back into the sport.
That's good on you, man. So pretty much it depends on how willing the person is, how fast it goes, right?
Yes, they've got to be cooperative. They certainly have to discontinue their drug use. They do have to be cooperative.